Hey, hey everybody. Today is the needle bar. Oh, I can't see the title. Let's see, hold. Everything artwork. So we're going to be talking about artwork as far as it comes to the different applications, how to prep artwork for digitizing, I do believe. Yep. And we have Nikki the Sassy Subber that is also going to talk to us about the art of sublimation and how to prep art for multiple applications. So, Nikki, let's start with you.
Why are you starting with me? That's just evil. That is evil. I mean, I can if you want, but I figured this was a Justin gig today. I'm just here along for the ride.
So let's go over the different types of art, how they apply, when they're used. This subject kind of sparked through a couple questions that I saw in the groups floating around Facebook, and the questions to me were structured in a way where I think people were interchanging the terms as far as artwork and even digitizing. A lot of times people don't understand digitizing. They say, well, I have the vector art already done because they paid, a graphic designer or an artist for their logo to be designed. So they think that they can take that file and apply it to all decoration. But from, as a digitizer, we're going to show you, the difference between utilizing vector art when digitizing next to a raster image. When I say a raster image, that's a flattened image like a JPEG or a PNG file are the most common ones. Right. Next to vector file, which a vector file is a lined art file where you could actually manipulate lines and edit the actual artwork, much like digitizing. But yeah, there's different applications as far as artwork's concerned. When it comes to screen printing, there's a couple different ways of screen printing. Traditional screen printing, there's using spot colors, and typically you were going to want to use vector art for that. There's process printing, which is also known as CMYK printing. You can use raster images if you don't have vector. That's usually done through a program like Photoshop, where you're just manipulating the artwork to use just the four colors CMYK: cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. But there's different applications as far as like sublimation. If you're looking to do transfers like DTF transfers,
HTV,
yeah, there's different applications. We're going to want different types of art depending on what you're trying to do. That's where artwork is such a generic term.
It's a loose term. It's really just a really loose term. I mean, it's just like a Band-Aid. It's this over everything.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
And there's some limitations too of how much control you have over the artwork. If someone gives you, really low quality artwork and you're trying to do certain decorations, there's some drawbacks to that, and there's some limitations. Like with sublimation, what do you usually use? Like a raster file?
No, actually you can use a raster file. So for like PNG, JPEG, but you want it at 300 DPI. Anything less than that, you are going to see poor quality. Now, do you want me to just dive right in with all the stuff that I do and where it matters? Because for an example, for me, I'm a graphics designer. When I'm printing banners, so I will print a banner and something that might look great at a 4x4 image. Once you go to blow that up to 24 by 24, you're going to get a pixelated image. So if you think that something on your screen at 72 DPI is going to work, it's not going to work. And that's basically pixels per inch type of thing. So you want to have as high DPI, especially when you're printing large items. Now, with that also said, when you're printing in sublimation, you can print full color, but you have to pay attention to where your white spots are because we don't print with white. So you have to think about it in that, and that aspect as well. Now, also on the flip side of what I do, because I print banners, I also do sublimation. I also print cut files, vector files for printed HTV. So not only do I have to worry about what the art looks like on the HTV, I also have to worry about making sure that I can cut all the cut lines with the HTV. So there's a lot that gets involved into this art when you're looking at something. So when somebody hands you something that's a bajillion colors, you have to look and see where the application is. So for me, I'm going to look at it and they'll say, hey, Nikki, I want this on a shirt. I'm going to look and see if I can do it as HTV because it's what I can do right here in house. How many am I going to be running? And then maybe it's, I have to skip up to, depending on the quantity, up to a screen print transfer or a direct to film. And again, you have to look at the different ways to do it. They might want a black shirt, so sublimation's out. If they want 87 colors, sure, you could do a full, what they call it, 4-color for screen print. But again, there's some drawbacks to that. So, I could dive deep into this topic, but yes, that is when you're looking at something, you have to look at it from many points of view.
Let me dive in here really quick, just
go for it
before we get too far into it. Here's some examples of vector art. Vector art is where you actually have lined art. Here, let me switch this to where you could actually manipulate the art, using nodes or using other tools. Right now I'm using Illustrator. You have your paint brushes and your pencils and whatnot, but that's what vector art, where you could actually grab individual elements. You can go to, your color palettes, change colors, and you can manipulate it. When you have text, it's workable text where you can change text within the design. A raster image is like a JPEG. That's where it's a flattened image, where the background and everything is together. Now, this one is a high resolution, so unless you really, really zoom in, you can kind of see the pixelated edges, but pretty much at 300 dpi, that's where Nikki was mentioning that, you can use this for printing and have a pretty quality print.
Mm-hmm.
Something that is saved in a lower resolution, as you can see, just not even barely moving, zooming in, you can see all this chatter out here. And you got really jagged edges. So that's going to show up in your prints, depending on what process you're doing, how big you're blowing up that art.
And if you go to cut that file from a cutting point of view for printed HTV, that one, the bottom one, is going to cut so jagged. The amount of nodes, because you're going to go over and you're going to, like in my Corel, I'll create it to a bitmap. I'm going to have about 8 bajillion nodes on that thing when I go to, convert it over.
Exactly.
You want something with clean lines.
Those pixels on the edge there, depending on what process you're putting it through, it's gonna recognize that edge as all these little bumpy edges. It's not gonna get it as clean edges. Most of the time, in any type of printing's concern, the vector art is going to be your best case scenario. Even if you don't want to change it or manipulate it in any way, it's 100% the cleanest art that you can use. You're going to have clean edges, unless your artwork is done originating from bad art and someone just does an auto trace or something like that. But Illustrator, CorelDRAW, those are probably the most commonly used softwares to create vector art. There are some other ones out there that some people use. Affinity, I think, is one.
Affinity, Inkscape.
Yeah.
GIMP. Those Inkscape and GIMP are the free versions.
Yeah. So if someone gives you an AI file, you know that it's something that's created it or saved in Illustrator. CDR is CorelDRAW. But as far as, kind of like equivalent to the DST file, which is kind of the generic digitized file that most softwares can use. When you're asking for vector art, it doesn't really matter where it comes from if it's saved in something like an EPS file. An EPS is going to be a kind of a generic vector art file that you can get from an artist. Sometimes PDFs. If PDFs are saved from an art program and they're saved as vector, those can be, vector files embedded within the PDF files. SVG is another file type that can be possibly, if it is saved directly from an actual vector file, that's going to be vector as well. If you are getting things like JPEGs, PNGs, GIF or GIF, however you want to call it, those are going to be your raster images.
So I just want to point out here that just because you have an AI file or a CDR file does not mean that it is a vector.
Correct.
Correct. Yes, if I can come into Illustrator and someone gives me this low quality raster image, I can import it in here, go save it as justinzart.ai and send it to Jeff and say, oh, I have an AI file.
Yeah.
Oh, you can save something however you want to save it. It doesn't mean it's going to be good quality.
Exactly. Yeah. If it's just like the native files in digitizing. If you're digitizing in Wilcom and you save it as an EMB file and you send it to somebody that also has Wilcom, it's a workable file saved in the native language. Same with vector. If it's created in Illustrator, saved in an Illustrator file, it can be, utilized as vector. Same with Corel and all the rest of the.
I will say that Canva is one of the new things that's on, everybody's radar. Canva, you can create in there SVGs. Just make sure that when you're in there and you're creating those SVGs and PDFs and whatnot, you make sure you select the correct one and make sure that your background is transparent. That's something that people don't realize when they're creating those kind of things. Make sure your background is transparent if you're going to have that PNG, because it's easier for somebody like myself or you guys to be able to go in and make that artwork and convert it over versus, you know what I mean? It's just kind of one of those things. So be careful if you're in Canva. You have plenty of options over there to also create vector artwork, believe it or not.
Right.
I will say canvas size matters.
Yes. And yes, that does matter. Very much so.
There's a lot of times too where they may have parts of the artwork that are JPEGs or PNGs and whatnot. If they're working with a PNG and then they just add text to it, so you're getting half vector, half raster image. One other thing too is you got to be careful if you are sharing any type of vector image like an Illustrator file. If you are using text or fonts within that file, you definitely want to, I can't remember what it's called in Corel.
What?
But when you have text and you're done editing the text and you got your spelling right and all that,
you convert it to outline.
Exactly. Is it converting to outlines in Corel?
If
outlines to objects, something like
well,
that.
It's create outline.
So what are we doing with it? Because if you use your text in Corel, you can already use it as a cut file for me. It's already there.
What I'm saying is if you've created your artwork in Corel or Illustrator, for instance, Illustrator, right now this is text. This is editable text that I can come in here and change my text, spelling, right, whatnot. But if I am going to be sharing this Illustrator file with somebody, the information of this font is going to be embedded into that file.
So it won't matter for me for Corel, because when I bring it into Corel, I bring it in and convert it over to a bitmap. Okay. I cannot go in and edit it.
Right. And if you are wanting to bring it into, if someone else has say Illustrator and they want to bring it in and do some editing or create separation, yes, if they don't have that font in their system, it's going to give them an error saying that there's a font used that your computer doesn't have.
Correct.
So it is in Illustrator, it's called create outlines, and that actually turns that font into now just a vector.
And in Corel, what you're doing is you're just tracing bitmap. You're just tracing the bitmap of it, and now you've got where you can move only the letters. You can't change the letters, but you can move them around, and now they're created into a vector art.
Here, here's a good example. I know I was working with
convert to curves. That's what it's called.
There's that too, but you can also trace bitmap.
There was a file that somebody gave us to print, and importing it in. If you can see here, it's giving me this font here. When they originally saved this Holy Ahoy was done in a font that I don't have on my system. So this is a perfect example of partly a raster image where the monkey was a raster image and the rest of this was actual vector art where the text was done in vector art. So if this is the case, this is defaulting. My system's defaulting to just a generic font that I have on my computer. So trying to open or import this, that's a problem because they didn't convert to curves or create outlines or whatnot. I have a trick in Illustrator. I don't know if this works in Corel, but when you are placing artwork in Illustrator, there is an option down here that you can link the file to your art file.
Oh, I hate that.
And it actually
he loves that feature. He loves that feature because I hear about it all the time.
It's a pain in the butt because it can cause other problems if it's not saved in a certain way. But if you can see here, it brings it in as just a full image. And this text is not defaulting now because it's not recognizing it as text. And if you go to Object and Flatten Transparency, and you have this convert all text to outlines, now I was able to open a file. Let me just ungroup all this. A file that I didn't have a font, and now it's vector art. That's just a cool little tip that I use.
Usually when I get linked files, I don't get all of the files. I get like 3 of the files, and then you try to open it, it doesn't work.
Yeah, so that's a whole other thing, that if someone sends you a file that has linked embedded files in it, they actually have to send you all the linked files as well. Otherwise, when you open it, there's just blank squares. But that's one trick to use artwork that you don't have a font for in Illustrator. But yeah, this is a good example of this monkey here. It's raster. The rest of the text is actually vector, where I can go in and manipulate, change colors, whatnot. But as you can see, this is a high res image, so utilizing.
I would not want to digitize that. I'm just going to tell you that right now.
This is for.
Do not make that the challenge in class. Okay, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it.
This was a print order that we have in house right now, so we actually.
So if you take that, so that's for screen print, right?
Correct.
Okay, so if I looked at that from a sublimation point of view, here's the things that you have to think about. Can you zoom in on that for me, please? So a couple things to think about when you're looking at your art. First, what are you going to be putting on? What kind of shirt? Especially if you do sublimation. If you're not going to be like Justin, who can just walk in and say, screen print this. Some of us are buying screen prints. Some of us are buying direct to film. But here's some things you need to know when it comes to this. So for this particular thing, the white's not going to print if you put it on a white shirt. If you put it on a gray, everything that's gray will print white. Now, if you were going to put this in for a direct to film, that white box is going to print because they do print in white. So you have to go in and you're going to have to take out that white box. Same holds true for if you're trying to send your file over. If I go to send that over, Justin's going to go, are you going to want that white box around there?
Right.
Like, yeah, that's going to be the first question. Like, do you really want that box? So you have to look at your artwork and try to neaten it up the best you can. I understand people send you screenshots, so you send us screenshots, but those screenshots are a nightmare. That is
probably the off angle of a window.
Oh, yes. So I understand you need to really educate your clients. That is definitely something that I keep trying to do, is educate your clients when they're taking their photos and they're sending them, hey, I want this. Or they send the screenshot of somebody else's work and it's 4 feet away. That kind of thing. But I'm going to just tell you from the different types of printing point of views, I am going to, if you were to send it to me, I'm going to print that whole square. And it's going to get cut just like that, depending on which type of method I'm using. So you really got to pay attention to your artwork. Well, yes, we can make cut lines. Yes, we can make vector and rasterized images. It goes further than that. It goes a lot deeper than that.
Right.
So.
All right, everybody hold on. We forgot to go through the comments. So we're going to go through the comments.
Sorry.
Got to catch up. No, it's okay.
I was nerding out on the stuff that I do.
Ramona said, can you vectorize the monkey?
I can.
Yes, yep. And it's a pain.
But our 40 minutes left is not going to be sufficient.
It's not sufficient. So we have Cindy King joining us. Hello, Cindy. Barb LaFond checking in from North Central Minnesota. Frank Dunn from over in the UK. Hello. Eloise checking in from Florida. I hope you're not getting hurricane too bad. We have Jesse Gibson checking in. Hello. We have Mike Muldowney, the nerd from the north. Hi, everybody driving. Smart Alec comments will be at a minimum.
Oh, darn.
He only posted that 3 times, so we're good. We have Ramona. I made it. And, oh, sorry, Cat's wrong. I have that same problem because it's an easy problem to make when you're digitizing. You accidentally do that a lot. We have Christine checking in from Atlantic Beach, Florida, trying not to eat my hurricane snacks. Yes, I recommend not doing that. And the convert to curve is what it's called in Corel. One day we will teach Justin Corel. He cringed.
It can also be it is also, yes, you could do convert to curve, but you can also trace bitmap on a lot of stuff. Like I would trace the bitmap on this, go down to a high resolution, and I could pull and make that into a vector art. I can also, there's a couple different ways, but I also look at it from a cut file point of view because I create SVGs. I create stuff to, cut on HTV. So I go about it in stickers and stuff like that. I go about it slightly different.
So I have this pulled into Photoshop. So for instance, if I am using this in a way, sending it to a transfer company or needing it where I'm going to be printing from a raster object, this white background has to go. So pulling it into Illustrator, something like Illustrator, where you can remove parts of it. Again, this isn't vector, so you cannot, just grab the background and delete it like you would a vector object. But something like in Photoshop, where if it's clean enough, you can just go in. Of course, there's little bits and pieces.
Tell them what tool you're using, sir.
This is a magic eraser tool where it actually just selects the whole color of the area that I'm using. There's different settings as far as tolerances of how much tolerance that you can go. There's different ways of coming in here and cleaning this up. There's different tricks in Photoshop, but if I drop this green background out, you can see that this is now a transparent background. So you're just getting just the parts that you're wanting to print. Mm-hmm. So that's something you can take to, sublimation or ordering a transfer where you're not going to get that white square behind it. So.
Yep. Yeah, there's a couple different methods that you can use to take out a white background out of something. You can also do edit to subject, I think it is, and it'll take the subject matter and go in, and you can change the tolerance for that too, so it does it all at once. There's a couple different methods.
Right. The newer Photoshops are getting pretty advanced on the AI generators and how it's recognizing faces and subjects and stuff like that, and kind of differentiating the background.
It could put a human face on that monkey.
Right. Yeah.
So
it's pretty crazy what some of the stuff is coming out, but yeah, those are kind of the different artworks that you're going to be working with. So Nikki brought up a good point that a lot of times when we're as a digitizer, if we get a design that has a shape, something like a circle, and within the circle there's an emblem in the center, maybe it has a black border around the circle, has some text within it, and if a raster image is given to us, we now have that white square on the outside, and the middle of that circle is white. So it's a guessing game if we don't have the instructions saying I want this completely filled,
right?
Or if it's going to be a patch and they're utilizing the white background to be their twill material, or if they want it open so it's a void, so there's no stitches. When artwork is given something like that, where we can't differentiate if that's just a flattened object with the background showing through, or if you're wanting to actually digitize the stitches, that's something that you have to kind of remember when you are sending artwork into a digitizer.
So let's rodeo over this to what I create logos for a living. So when I now look at logos, I've been out of the embroidery game for a couple of years, and I never looked at anything from a digitizer's point of view. So now when I'm creating logos, the first thing out of my mouth is, are you ever going to want this digitized for embroidery? And they'll be like, Well, why? Well, because you've got like 14 billion colors in this one logo, and it's fantastic. It's gorgeous. It sets you above the rest. I get that. But at the end of the day, are you going to be able to put that on a left chest or on a cap? Let's have this conversation. So now I have these conversations with people. I don't want to say dumb down the version, but you definitely want to simplify your version of whatever your logo is and have an extra one. So when you're building a logo for somebody, you want to have a simplified version. You want to have a social media version. And this is, I know this is going to sound crazy what I'm about to say. So you have a digitized version for embroidery. You have a social media version. And then you have the one that you can use for screen print and direct to film. Because direct to film, you want to have cutouts in things. So you're going to want to eliminate some colors, where in screen print, you don't necessarily need those cutouts, but you're also don't want 8,000 color changes, because that's an upcharge for every color change. So you have to really look at a logo and give them different options if you are the kind of person who's building a logo for somebody. There's a lot to look at for various reasons. And that's why for like you and I who do this for a living, these are just the questions we ask. But if you wanted to get into this part of it, there's a lot into it. So I was thinking about that today. I was like, you know what? I create all these logos, and that's the first thing out of my mouth is, are you ever going to do this in embroidery? Let's start there. So
Right, because there's different levels as far as, you know, what services that you may offer. Like if you are kind of going to a one-stop shop, like going to Nikki, you know, she can design you, you know, a design itself from scratch. You know, she can say, all right, this could be used on A, B, and C when it comes to printed materials or decals or whatever it may be. And those are questions that she's going to ask, you know, are you to use this for embroidery? A lot of times, decorators out there, they are simply just taking people that are bringing their design. They don't actually do design work. But in the same realm, if they are coming to you saying, you know, I need this done, and they're only ordering embroidered hats at the time, that might be a question that comes up saying, hey, if you are going to be doing silk screening in the future, or if that's right around the corner, you know, maybe let's go ahead and just get the artwork done now. So you get vector art done, you can make those changes that you need to make for embroidery. And something that Eric always preaches is not everything has to be exactly the same when it comes to left chest printing, full back printing, hats. It's instead of duplicating the same logo on everything that you do, it's more like coordinating. You know, you may have, you know, that image with the monkey and the text is actually going on the back of the shirt. You know, maybe they do hats where they just do a simplified monkey on the hat, maybe the text on the side.
Right. You want to give them the options that they can absolutely have.
Right.
But I mean, at the same time, it's better to have that initial conversation than have it 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years down the road, because again, of the different techniques. And I first just need to know that Mike did agree with me. I need that in public knowledge somewhere that Mike agreed with me, because
we need to like screenshot it. And
yeah, I mean, I feel like I need to, because Mike agreed with me. But no, you're right. But you get more bees with honey. I know that sounds crazy. Then you're just getting it all out of the way now, and you have it as a file. They understood that you are going to maybe create other things for them later on down the road. But I don't know. I just look at it differently, I guess. Most people.
Mike also made a comment about tracing bitmaps. Tracing bitmaps is pretty much equivalent to auto digitizing. You are relying on the software to know where colors are and to utilize, you know, when you're tracing a bitmap, you are tracing a raster image. So it's going to really depend on how.
Right. But I use mine for cut reasons. That's what I put that is there as my disclaimer, just so you know, Michael. No, I love how he agrees with me, and then now he tells me no. So
no, I'm just saying,
harassing me. I use it for when I'm cutting stickers. I'm going to use that for when I'm cutting printed HTV. I don't necessarily, and I know how to go in and fix that, but that was something that I had to learn. If it's one of those things that I'm going to use it for something other than what I'm doing at that moment, yes, you to convert to curves, but there are other ways to get to where you need to be. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
I was speaking more in terms of
harassing me.
getting vector art, if you don't do it in house, I know a lot of embroiderers, they'll sub the digitizing out. If they do any type of printing in house, they may sub out their artwork to a company. Like I do both. I do vector art and digitizing. So there's customers that I do both. I think it's more common that if people are printers, they have the capabilities of doing artwork in house more than digitizing in house, only because typically to create screens for screen printing or like what Nikki does as far as cutting out vinyl or something like that, they're already using an art program. So a lot of times they have that knowledge. But if you are subbing everything out as far as artwork and digitizing, you just got to be careful, because just in the same realm of auto digitizing, where someone just grabs the image, throws it in, tells the software that has the auto digitizing function, auto digitize, the output pretty much is usually useless. Same with auto tracing from vector art. Yes, it is quote unquote vector. It is editable elements, but it's not going to be true clean vector art. So that's just something to be careful about. But speaking of, you got.
Hold on, we have questions. Let me get questions.
Okay. He doesn't want to work. He's just going to let the two of us talk. Is that how that works?
It's been going great so far. Matt wants to know how we got that selfie of him. Well, you posed for it.
the meme selfie?
No, the monkey.
Oh,
thank you, Mike.
We have Cindy asking, Justin, do y'all as digitizers mind that we sometimes buy a cap logo so we can use for left chest too? I know it cuts into revenue.
No, typically I don't charge for an upcharge for both unless I actually have to change a lot in the digitizing or change the logo elements. If it's just a matter of like maybe scaling it a little bit either way for one or the other, I don't charge anymore.
Yeah, and if you tell us ahead of time and we can make it for both, I mean, it's just...
I was gonna say, I usually say I need it for left chest and hat. That's usually the first things out of my mouth.
And I have a customer that like I've said before, he does a lot of schools, so it's his left chest, hat, and beanie is almost every time. So, but yeah, it typically goes from hat to shirt. It works fine. The other direction, it doesn't always work as well. So no, I don't mind actually as much information as far as all the applications that you're going to do. It's going to save editing and time down the line.
And even if you don't think, like you say, oh, well, maybe someday I might do ... Do it now, get it done over with. It saves a lot of time.
Right.
And the only thing that I would add to that as a caveat is if you tell Justin you're going to run it on a micro fleece sweater, right?
Yes.
He's going to optimize it for a micro fleece sweater. If you tell him you want it for a micro fleece sweater and a cap, and you want it to be the same file, chances are he's going to put it somewhere to be optimized between the two.
Right.
So the results may change a little bit if you get them individually made, but you can still get one file that will apply to both.
Right. So yeah, another question that comes up from time to time, if I'm quoting a design when it comes to digitizing, and I say, this design's not going to translate well into embroidery, I try to describe as much of the simplification or the changes that need to be made, just so they're aware. Mm-hmm. And these are changes and adjustments that I'm making while digitizing. So, for instance, if there's a lettering with an outline on it and it's 5 millimeters tall, typically I'm going to tell somebody, hey, this lettering should really stay one color. So when I'm working on that art from that artwork and I'm digitizing, I know I'm digitizing it one color. But a lot of times what the question comes back is, well, can I see an example prior to digitizing? So it needs to be understood that, as a digitizer, and hopefully you have a digitizer that can recognize these things and tell you beforehand. A lot of digitizers will just digitize the way they think it needs to be. Don't tell them. And I think that's where a lot of times, miscommunication comes in and people aren't happy with the end result because they're not told ahead of time. But right. When I do tell them ahead of time that there's limitations, the question does come up. Can I see that that a sample image prior to digitizing, and that's where it comes into. Okay, well, if you want to see that, that's where if you're not giving me vector art, I'm going to have to recreate it. I'm going to actually have to create vector art to show you all these changes prior to. And a lot of times it's not worth the expense to them just to see something prior to digitizing when that's going to be the end result as it is. So
right. So I'm going to grab this next question. Ramona asks, Nikki, when you take a raster PNG and you trace it, you still get a pixelated edge. How do you remove that?
I don't get a pixelated edge.
I think it would mean excess nodes, which you can go in and remove.
You can actually go in, and there's actually a smooth function in there too. You can actually go in and it'll automatically just kind of reduce some of the nodes in there. There's a couple different ways to do it. I also don't do quick. When I do a trace for it, trace to bitmap, I don't do a quick one. I go in and do the high, so it kind of drops it down a lot more. And that's in Corel though. So just, you guys have to understand when I'm talking about tracing bitmap, and I'm going to say that again as a disclaimer, I'm doing it to creating cut files for myself. So it cuts down on the amount of what I need, and I just know what to go in and do. As for design wise, it's something completely different. So
let me show you in Illustrator. So if you have it selected, you could actually go to, where's trace? Image trace.
Oh.
It's got clipping masks and stuff. That's a whole other subject matter. So going into image trace, it's going to give you different types of presets, and it's going to give you options to, if you want to do black and white, color. And starting from something that was pretty clean and from the get-go, you're not going to have all those pixelated edges. But if you did, this is where you can kind of...
I mean, some of the images I get are like 200 by 200 pixel. They right-click, copied it off the internet, and send it as a raster. And it looks good at maybe a 1/4 inch tall on my screen, but they want it 3 inches wide. And now it's got steps on every letter.
And that's where in Illustrator, this gives you all kinds of different options. As you can see, the path option here really kind of made it choppy. It kind of reduced the number of nodes. You can increase it and it's going to smooth things out. So a lot of times it's just a matter of what your program gives you as far as options, as far as tracing and kind of smoothing that out. And there's even manual tools where if you just kind of get it to the best you can, finalize your trace, and you can go in there, grab the elements, and there's smoothing tools where you can kind of just pencil over them and it starts smoothing them too. So depending on what software you use, that's what you pretty much have to do. There's some softwares that do it better than others. Illustrator, this is the most updated Illustrator, so it does it pretty well. There's some sites even that you can kind of go on there if you're needing simple work done and you do have a high res image. There's some sites that do some vectorizing that are pretty decent, that are free. So
yep. All right, let me check the other questions. Cindy says, well, don't y'all usually give the software file so we can increase or decrease the logo? Justin does. I know I do. It depends on the digitizer because I know some that don't. And it also depends on what software your digitizer is using, because if your digitizer is using Design Shop and you're running Wilcom, it may give you the Design Shop file, but you don't have the ability to open it and scale it. So we'll go from there, and we'll bring up Matt's question because we'll bring up Matt's question. That's my problem. I will easily pay $200 for a single design to be digitized since I'm making 1,000+ units of it, but no one can understand what I want. Is it me? Am I the problem? Maybe.
Well,
Matt's always the problem.
Ramona says, can that be taught in a step-by-step detail? Because I always get rough edges and those edges come across. I am sure that that can. I don't think we'll be able to cover that all in today's live, considering we've got like, what, 20 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, it could range from what we were talking about, depending on what software you have and what capabilities you have to change the settings as far as a trace. If it's super bad and someone's giving me, you know, a 72 DPI, and no matter what I do, it's just kind of like the same realm of auto digitizing. By the time you auto digitize, go in there and edit all the elements, it's faster just to create the digitizing from scratch. Same with vector art. If it's so bad and it's a process that you absolutely need vector art for, it's just a matter of going in and doing it by hand, where you're redrawing the image so you get vector clean lines.
Yep, which is very similar to what we do for embroidery. Because a lot of the times when we're doing, you know, we get raster art, and sometimes even when we get the vector graphics, we still have to go in and redraw the objects in a certain way that'll allow it to be broken up and sewn on a machine.
Right. You have Pulse pulled up?
I do.
All right. Let's take an example. I sent Jeff a couple examples as far as the raster image and the vector image, and we're going to show how it applies to digitizing using Pulse, on how they differ as far as digitizing from one vector or one artwork type to another.
Yep. So first up, we have our raster art. Naturally, this is what we tend to get a lot of. That is not the right keyboard shortcut. Sorry about that. Apparently, I can't use all my keyboard shortcuts. But this is the this is a raster image, and we can see here that if I zoom in, we get this really granulated line, and that's what we were talking about earlier. Is if it's a low DPI, you'll get this granulated line. So in traditional digitizing, and most what everyone would do here, and we even sometimes do it with vectors, is we would of course start with our tools and we kind of decide how we're going to path this. And honestly, I'd probably go center out. So I'm just going to pick a letter here, and I'm going to start with the A. And if I was coming from the R, I would come up and over, moving. In this instance, I'd be moving from right to left. And then we would be getting our enhanced column or digitized blocks in other software. And we would basically be drawing the line coming across. And it can be kind of time consuming. We can go here, and I'm not going to be accounting for push compensation in these examples, but that is also something that we have to keep in mind, is that these open ends of our columns will push up. But I'm going to go and I'm going to drop down through all of the objects. So that would be traditionally how we would do this letter. And then, of course, we'd need to move our start and stop points, for instance. And this is one thing that I really like about Pulse, is I can highlight all of these objects, and I actually have access to all the start and stop points. So I can move this one there and this one here, and I can move this one over here so it's a little bit closer to the S, all with all of the objects selected, instead of having to like tab through all the different objects, which is kind of nice sometimes. Now, if we were to do this S, this is where having a vector can actually save us a lot of time. But if we were going to do this S, again, with the enhanced column, or we could use something similar to, I believe this is column B in Wilcom, where we end up drawing around the shape. So we're just going to move around the shape here. And this is a lot of what traditional digitizers do. When you send in your artwork to have it done, they're going to actually manually redraw all of it, which, you know, you think that you send them the file and they're just going to send you back a quick edit, when in actuality, almost everything's being redrawn by hand. I'm going to go ahead and close that shape. And I'm going to hit enter, and I accidentally hit the wrong shape. But now it's going to ask me for my stitch lines, and I'll go back and I'll fix that later. We'll put in some stitch lines, and I have it generating automatically. So it's going to regenerate with every stitch line, which is a lot of fun. Or stitch angle line, which is a lot of fun, but we'll go ahead and do that there. And then, of course, I'd need to go in to my edit nodes and come in here and select that node. And I need to convert it to a cusp. So I can grab this little handle here and I can flatten off that edge. So that's going to be our, what the majority of us are going to do. And I want to change the angle line. So I'm just going to grab this angle line here a little bit and bring it down to smooth out that curve. We'll pull this one over just a little bit and this one down just a little bit. I should have placed those better, but when it randomly generates them all the time, it can get a little confusing. So there's a couple, that's kind of typically what you would need to do. Pulse is really cool where I actually can do that with just the pen tool. So if I wanted to, for instance, draw this, we're going to draw the R, and I'm going to use the little button instead of the keyboard shortcut because that'll pull my screen off of there. So I can actually draw the R, and I come up here and I can do the entire object, which is kind of neat. Because, and I don't think Wilcom has this, but it has virtual split lines that you can add in there, which will basically, I'll end up telling the software that I want it to put a cut right there when I'm putting in my angle lines. And we're going to hope that this works the first time I do it, because I don't do it very often. But it is something that's available. And I can draw these pieces individually here. And then I can combine them as a single object like that. So we will grab our two and we'll pull out our sequence view here so that we can see it and pin it. There we go. And one of the cool things here is a tool guide too. So if I have questions about a tool when I'm actually using the tool, I can go to the tool guide and it'll kind of give me directions on how to utilize it. So I went ahead and I combined those two objects. Now I'm going to right click here on the satin path, and I need to right click here and convert segment 2, and we'll go to a satin path. And now it's going to ask me here to enter the angle lines. So I can go ahead and start entering them here. I want one here. We'll go one here. And this is one of the settings that I have set up here that I actually probably shouldn't. But that is my problem and not yours, is where it's regenerating. So you can see how it's kind of regenerating that hole. And now when I hit the enter key, now it's going to tell me to enter the virtual slice lines in. So my virtual slice line is going to come right there. And I can hit enter again, and it's going to start to carve this object. And I actually needed to add another virtual slice line in there. So let's go here, curved rectangle. And this one I'll end up just actually slicing it. So I'm going to cut here like so. And now if I would have placed the trims on these objects when I set them, stop command trim, we'll get rid of those. So it kind of allowed me to utilize that shape without too much extra work going into it. Pulse also has another really neat tool that is, oh, it let me do that. I hit spacebar and then I realized it. So if I'm digitizing with like the classic blocks here and I go up, I can actually, instead of finishing my object, I can hit the K key and it'll allow me to start a new branch. So I'll move here, and then when I'm finished with the two objects, when I hit enter, it actually will do them as two separate objects, but they're branched together. So I don't have to worry about the start and stop point. It's kind of combined them already, and it'll run through the entire letter, which is pretty cool. So that's with Rastery, yes?
Oh, okay, you're going to vector. Go ahead. Continue.
I can go back.
Nope, that's where I was headed.
Okay. So with vector art, it changes just a little bit because it actually comes into adding or just converting the objects. So right now I can convert segment 2 and I can go with a satin path again, and I can just add my angle lines here, and I can add one here.
Let me add something here. This is just for people, they hear us always preaching, automated digitizing is not quality digitizing. This is not considered automated digitizing. This
No,
is because we were able to get the vector art, we are converting an object to stitches. But as the digitizer, we're still going to be choosing the stitch angles, the type of stitch it is, the underlay, the start and stop points, how it paths. So we're deciding all that. If Jeff were to just grab that raster image that he was working with before, hit auto digitize, you would see stitch angles all over the place. You'd have,
Right, that I would have. So I've done that.
Yeah, small elements that are fill stitches that shouldn't be, larger elements that are satin stitches that shouldn't be. So yeah, this is just, if we luck out that we're getting vector art, it's just something that kind of just maybe cuts a little bit of time of us tracing each element, but we're still applying the same principles, the same settings, the same knowledge of the best way to digitize it for quality.
But let me say, from a new person's point of view in the digitizing world, because I've been learning how to digitize over the last month of knee deep in class, I have auto digitized things, and one of the first things that Jeff will say, okay, so now did you go in and fix all the problems with that you could have just started out with? Yes. Sometimes though, when I'm not familiar with doing something, I will auto digitize it, and then I'm going in and I'm learning my settings. Is it the most optimal way of doing things? No, but it's helping me to learn to go what to look for. Right. So for those of us that are still learning, it's not a horrible thing, but you're going to find yourself more times than not going and fixing all of their, stock settings, and going in and fixing it because it's nothing of what you wanted it to look like. So, I mean, it has its place, but if you can learn from scratch, learn from scratch.
So if I look at the next object here, this is an E. I could do it like I did the R in the last one, where I ended up putting a split line in and doing that, because this is essentially, that's what I did. These are my artwork tools. These tools draw vector art. So for this, I could go in and I could convert it, and I could change it to a split line, or I can come in here and I can actually slice the object and I can cut it across there. And now I've made two separate objects, which if I take them and I break the two apart, now I have two separate objects where I can go in and I can actually node edit, and I can select those two nodes and I can delete them. And now I have two separate objects, and I can go into this object and I can pull that under. Let me get the selection tool here. We'll make sure that we have just the one selected. And I can pull that under, and now I have my overlap that I need for when I convert this to a satin path. So I can convert it, and that was not the one I wanted to convert to, so bear with me.
Can you do that in other digitizing software as well? Or is this
just
a Pulse thing?
You can. Some of them do it better than others. Some are a little bit more, like I would say Pulse is a lot more artwork based than some of the others, but the others you can absolutely do that. Now, as you guys can see, this is regenerating the stitches every time I put a stitch angle line, and not all the time. Like, that's a setting that I went in and I changed because I like to see my stitches generate in real time.
Real time.
Yep. So I could go in there and I could turn that off, and it wouldn't generate them in real time. After I get done editing an object, I would have to hit the G key to be able to. I can't click buttons and think at the same time. I'd have to hit the G key and able to generate the stitches, yeah, that's what it stands. G generate stitches. That's how I remember it. So that's two different ways that I'm able to go ahead and utilize the existing objects. And sometimes when it comes down to it, I'll look at an object and like this T, because it's only 6 lines, it's faster for me to be able to go ahead and digitize it from scratch. But sometimes with objects like C's, that's a lot of node points. It's easier for me to just convert segment to and convert it to a satin path. And that's something that I do when I get good vector art. Pulse has in it a push compensation. So on objects like this, when I generate the object and I go into my settings and I want to apply settings to it, I can actually add push comp to the satin to take care of these ends. without having to manually compensate for push compensation. Now, if I was doing objects like the T and I was cutting them, I would, of course, compensate for the push. If I have objects that intersect, then that's going to change how I digitize them coming into it. But it really comes down to me as a digitizer. I'm looking at the objects. If I come in here and I click on this O and there's, let's say, 85 more nodes, I'm going to clean up the nodes or I'm going to redraw it. Because the fewer nodes that you have, that's fewer decision points for the software to make when it's calculating how it's going to lay out those stitches. So you want, not only do you want vector, but you want a nice clean vector versus something that was maybe just auto traced and they didn't clean it up and you have too many lines. So
best case scenario when you are sending art to a digitizer, vector is first choice. If you have the vector, definitely send it to a digitizer. Now, bringing that vector into the software, Willcom does a lot of what Jeff's showing here in Pulse. You know, as the digitizer, when we're bringing that in, we can decide on if it's done correctly or clean vector art where there's not a lot of nodes. We'll utilize things like this throughout our digitizing. Even if we don't and we just set it as our background, that's still going to be the cleanest image that we can work from. All the lines are going to be straight. You're not going to have that chatter, that pixelation that you get from raster images. If there is only a raster image available when you're sending it to a digitizer, 300 or higher DPI, please. As you can see on the other one that he was working on first with the raster image, there was that little bit of pixelation around the edges that you see. It's not bad, and especially dealing with something like lettering where we can kind of gauge.
We've seen worse.
Yeah. So on that A edge, Jeff knows that we're not supposed to be digitizing that zigzag little pixelation.
Right.
Right. You know, I'm going to make these straight lines and I'm going to, it's basically leaving it to me. I'm going to pick where I think that line is supposed to fall.
Right.
You're just adding more time to your digitizer and your graphics designer and all of that by sending a poor quality image.
Well, not only that is, you know, this is black text on a white background, so we could all kind of differentiate what's exactly supposed to be there. But a lot of times when you're getting into complicated designs and you're having layer upon layer upon layer, this text may be on a background. Say it's over that monkey, and there's a tidal wave behind the monkey, and you have all these different elements coming together. As you can see, Jeff zooming in and out as we're digitizing, we're constantly zooming in and out. The more we zoom in, all these pixelated parts of the images are going to come together. And a lot of times we may say like, okay, is there supposed to be something there? Is this just pixelated parts of the image that are kind of bleeding together? Those are the things that we need to worry about when the designs are at low resolution. So
this was a great question. While you were talking about that, I wanted to pop that in.
Yep. So that is actually a really good question. Now, I can honestly tell you I own Adobe Illustrator. I bought Adobe Illustrator because people kept sending me AI files. But with digitizing software, I know Pulse is integrated with Corel, and I can go into Corel mode, and so is Willcom. Now, what I personally like to do, and I don't know about you, Justin, but when I send out vector files, I like to send out an EPS or SVG because those are fairly universal across all of the softwares. You can import it into AI, you can import it into Corel, you can import it into the digitizing software. So personally, if you're going to send me art, I'd like an EPS or an SVG. What about you, Justin?
I mean, I use AI, so I can use that, but if Tom were sending that to you, say, and you don't have Illustrator and he's sending you an AI, then there might be issues. There are some older versions of softwares that will allow you to import different software types like Illustrator into Corel and vice versa. I don't know if that's even compatible anymore. I know some older versions of Illustrator would read Corel file.
Right.
But I think the competition out there is, you know, and the softwares are so advanced now that they're not allowing that cross utilization. So using kind of like the digitizer, sending a file type that is most generally used, if we don't know, typically I send people a DST and a PES file. Between those two, more than likely, any digitizing or embroidery software out there is going to be able to open it and use it, or even a machine. Same with the artwork file. If you're sending it to me, AI is fine. Convert your text into curves or create curves. But if you are sending it to somebody and you want to make sure that it's universally used, EPS or SVG is probably your best bet, or even a PDF that is saved as a vector.
Yes. Yeah, I was just going to say that when I'm creating a logo, I send them a PNG, a JPEG, and because again, it depends on what I'm designing for and where that logo is going. It depends on how I'm saving it as. But a lot of times a PDF will work across the board, and so will SVGs, obviously.
Exactly.
So,
and this is where having a good relationship with your digitizer comes in, because if you say your digitizer, hey, what file format do you want? Justin's going to tell you what one works with him the best and he's able to work with the fastest. He'll tell you what one he prefers. Same with me. I'll tell you what one I prefer. And if you don't have the software, like let's say you have Adobe Illustrator and I have Corel, there's always that EPS, SVG, but I often don't ask for an AI or a CDR file. I just ask for an EPS or an SVG, and that's what I work with. It's especially handy in the instances where Justin was showing, where if you don't have the font that they saved in when they were typing it out, now it's going to try to replace that font and you have to deal with that. Where if you save it out as SVG or an EPS, it's going to make sure that all of those letters are converted to outlines and you're able to work with it from there.
Right. Yep. Matt asked for bonus time, so I just want you to know. And
4 minutes of bonus time, Matt. There you go.
There you go. And then you have Sunshine over here.
Yep. Mike says auto digitizing is like any other tool. Got to know when and where to use it. If one doesn't know how to use a hammer, you're going to get holes in your dishes. There is that. I mean, I saw a fantastic video the other day of the sublimation process where the guy used a hammer on a black buckle to turn the webbing black. And then at the end, he goes, well, no, this isn't really how it works. Just kidding. Send us your art and we'll sublimate it for you. It was a pretty funny video.
It was. I literally was engaged in the video. I'm like, are you serious? You cannot be showing them how to do it that way. That's not. And then I realized what it was. Totally sucked you in. But yes, I mean, there are lots of different things when it comes to artwork. Like that's just a blanket statement. You have to ask, as I'm going to call those who are watching, you guys are the middlemen, really. For those of us that are graphics designers and digitizers, you have the clients. You're our client, and there's going to be a lot of back and forth questions. So get to know your graphics designer and your digitizer and find out where exactly your client is at. Your client may not care, but when it comes down to it, it's your work that's going to be all over, your local place. So you want quality. You don't want something that looks poor. And I will tell you that direct to film and HTV will print those horrible pixelated images. So where you can clear it up with screen print, I mean, Justin, correct me if I'm wrong on that one.
All art is not created equal, just like
right.
It's not only the pixelation as far as your resolution is the main concern that you have with any type of artwork, depending on what you're trying to do. But I can dive so deep into getting into actually editing raster art so it prints correctly, depending on, how vivid it prints in a CMYK print is different than spot colors. Spot colors, you're actually choosing PMS colors that you're using to print. CMYK is using a mixture of 4 colors to make those. So when you get into your artwork, you're going to start manipulating the different tone levels, your black levels, your light levels, all kinds of different things are involved that you start getting into to try to get that really vivid print. So there's so much involved. So yeah, if someone says they have artwork, it doesn't always mean that it's going to be print ready or embroidery ready or whatever.
Right. Yep. It's all about what you're going to be printing it on, and that's where it starts. That's the conversation that needs to happen right there, right out of the key.
And Barb says here, I'm going to address this comment that I thought you could convert a CDR file in Illustrator by using the converter so that it's an AI file. we could, and we could probably do an hour on that whole process. So maybe that's something for a future show, but it is possible to convert from one software to the other. It depends on the process that you're going to use and the versions of the files that you have. So, but I think I think now's a pretty good time to wrap it up. We're about 6 minutes into bonus time.
There you go, Matt. 6 minutes.
6 minutes.
And
All
no,
right.
some of these notifications, Ramona, just to answer your
No,
question.
that was mine. I'm sorry.
That's all right. But I don't know if there's anything else you guys want to throw in there before we close out.
Nope. Art matters.
Art matters. There you go.
All right. Well,
Perfect.
that is Justin Armenta from JA Digitizing Studios. Below is Nikki Adamkovich, the sassy subber. I am Jeff Fuller from Fuller Embroidery Works, and we're all here representing Embroidery Nerd. We'd like to thank you guys for your time, and we will talk to you later.
Good night, everybody.
Night.